This is a gathering of some of us are in a network we're calling the Public Imagination Network. And it's around this idea of supporting artists as world makers in cultural and public policy. And we also were this morning and we were laughing and smiling because we've been discussing this idea of policy, even the word. Like what is, Leslie was big on conversation. What is policy? What exactly is involved in it? And that's part of what we're going to be unpacking here today. What I wrote as a contribution is CPAMO's online session, which we had partnered with MassCulture in the spring of 2021, sparked the completion of a discussion paper, which is now a published paper from Shannon Litzenberger, to my left. Why we need artists now. And it also sparked, through another convening of that Shannon organized with the Agora Foundation, what is a cohort of thinkers around this idea, of which I'm a part, and this is a part, and also Evalyn. And so we're just going to have a conversation and talk about different things within that, how we're thinking about it.
Yeah, I guess we're hoping, even with our construction of the deconstruction of the panel format, spatial format, we're hoping to just invite folks into a kind of participatory framework. We are going to start out by talking a little bit, giving some context, and then we have some questions to ask, and hope that we can engage everybody here inside of this conversation, because we're very much in a formative stage as a network, and really saw this as an amazing opportunity to be in dialogue with more folks around the ideas that we're pursuing. So, shall I dive into sort of the beginning? Yeah. So I guess Leslie and I are going to share a little bit about what drew us together as a network, which really was kind of instigated by Shannon's writing of an article. And so Shannon and I knew of Shannon from the community at large, but it was really reading this article and feeling it fire in so many ways about things that I was already thinking about that led me to reach out to her. That turned out to be the case with many of us in this network, is that we were brought together by the ideas that Shannon articulated really beautifully and brought together in a piece. And one of those ideas, so we're not going to discuss the article, you can read it later, and I recommend you do, but we're going to talk a bit about various of those ideas and then how we're extending that thinking and thinking about it together. And maybe, actually, before I get into that, maybe I'll just like to say a little bit of word of introduction about myself, and perhaps each of us can do that when we talk to contextualize ourselves. So, so I'm a theater artist and worked for many years as an independent artist, and then worked as the artistic director of Buddies of Bad Times Theater for 5 years. And so that chapter came to the end. I stepped out of that role in 2020, and in the intervening time went back to school, and I've been doing my master's, which has been, I sort of look actually at that, my time at Buddies in a way was like, I think I did the PhD before I did the master's. Buddies was the PhD. And then I took some time out to like understand what the PhD was about, or like what all of that. So it's been a time of like a lot of reflecting and thinking about what happened and what I learned and what my perspective was on all the many different layers of learning that one does inside of a position like that in the arts, a kind of rare position like that relatively few people actually get to sit inside of for a while. Gives you a very different perspective on many things. Yeah, so my master's has been looking at connections about emergent organizational structures and movements in the arts around leadership and governance, and how things are like, how people are breaking down hierarchies, and how collectivity and collective thinking and are arising. In what ways is that apparent in the arts and outside of the arts? That's been a part of what I'm looking at in kind of terms of futures and this thing about world building. And so those were some themes that I guess connected me into the article. There were a lot of things, and one thing I want to think about today, I don't really bring up, is the idea of how the pandemic gave us this pause in production in the arts and a chance to like embody and live into being cut off from and then step outside of the sort of wheels of industrial production in the arts. And like that thing that we work toward as artist workers our whole careers and then kind of get stuck into. And I feel like today, you know, starting with Zainab's amazing talk this morning around the roots of EDI as an actual like product of capitalism in the sense like how it was about fueling production, thinking about our sector in terms of those very same, these ways that we inadvertently become actors in a system that we don't believe in, in systems that, you know, we can see are inequitable or aren't serving us. And the pandemic was this wild experience as a sector where we all suddenly experienced this stoppage, and what did that mean and what did that feel like? And now here we are, and like as the wheels start to turn again, and as we get back, sitting back into the systems, the public imagination is trying to really hold on to that space and hold on to that space of what happens if we don't continue with business as usual? What happens if we step off of the highway? So that was like a key idea that really felt resonant for me in so many ways, in part because it's kind of what my personal pandemic looked like, because I stepped out of leadership in the sort of in the midst of the pandemic. And then it became this extended time of reflection and thinking about the sector and thinking about how I wanted or didn't want to step back in, and about complicity and about like all these, anyway, these many intersecting layers that became more visible to us during the pandemic, very much including like this, which now I feel like I'm going to have to refer to EDI as an incorporated, like the EDI complex. Yeah, fascinating. So maybe that's all, that was a lot of talking for me. So I think that's a big idea that we're looking at about how to like do things, not replicate the system. And I think we're gonna use that word system quite a bit today, or like we think about it, unpack it a little bit. I'm also personally, like part of my practice is a wordsmith and a writer, and so I'm quite obsessed with vocabulary, and I feel like we're spending a lot of time in the public imagination group thinking about the words that we're using and debating what words are both like truly communicating the ideas that we're trying to unpack, and also accessibility in terms of language, and like what is our common understanding between each other, between people outside of the arts, between people outside of academic spaces, or anyways. Yes, I will end there and pass the mic to Leslie Ting. She has her own mic. I'll pass this on. Hello.
Is it? Oh, there we go. Hi. So my name is Leslie Ting, and I'm a musician, and so I have spent lots of time in the system of orchestral music, which is a very strong tradition. I think it's a strong tradition, like in the Western world. So, so in terms of Shannon's essay, I think the thing that for me, I was already sort of noticing and trying to live out was this idea of both world making and having to do it off the highway, so out of the structure. So I ended up leaving my tenured position in an orchestra because out of the system, because I wasn't feeling or like in a world that was comfortable to me, and the structure was so strong that I couldn't sort of be comfortable or fight my way through or help affect the change, especially as an individual. And I think that's one of the things about this network that is so great, is sort of solidarity as a group. And so I think this idea of imagining the new world is also something that artists are so good at, that we're good at sort of finding ways to test it and rehearse it and imagine it, and before we like iterating. We're quite good at that, workshopping, all those things. And I do think that getting out of the structures is part of what helps to facilitate that. And I will say that that does require a lot of resources and capacity, which, you know, for full transparency, like I do have some financial help in my life. That's just lucky for me. But so just to say that that wasn't an easy choice to make, and of course I wanted a stable job and a salary and all those things, but I was also, it was so toxic that I couldn't do it. It was like a choice of the system or me, and so it's not, you know, I feel lucky, but also I want to put my energy in a place that supports a lot of more people. So yeah, I would say that those are the things that really resonated for me in Shannon's article or essay. So yeah, I think maybe this word system, like that's maybe a good segue into talking about this word system again, which as someone in the group who is not very policy versed, that the word system and policy are both words that I'm still like, what's the outline of these words? And like how do I as an artist person get in there or affect change, or like how do I engage with those words and what they mean? So maybe Shannon can continue the conversation.
Yeah. Thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Shannon Litzenberger. I'm a dance artist, and I'm someone who's like done a significant amount of work, I would say, like in the cultural policy space. I've run an art service organization before. I've like worked on political campaigns before. I've written policy papers before. So I have some, you know, I'm somewhat versed in that world. I also work a lot in the leadership space, maybe similarly to what Evalyn was saying, like really interested in how we move from systems of individualism to systems of collectivity, and that has a lot to do with how we are together. Like, can we transform our world, even like small worlds of groups of people working together, to like larger worlds of cities and nation states, to really reorient ourselves toward collective thriving? What does that mean when I thrive, you thrive, as opposed to like my success comes at the expense of someone else, which is more the system that we're in. Even as artists, actually, we're really in that system. So yeah, I think the motivation to write the paper initially came out of like a lot of frustration during the pandemic, just seeing the way artists were being talked about a certain way in the media, like as if we're there to kind of entertain and comfort and distract people from the, you know, unfortunate circumstance of the pandemic. Well, you know, sing songs from our balconies so people don't feel so bad, which we did. But it, like, you know, and it made me frustrated that in the whole system of cultural production, like when you know, governments were looking at industry-specific ways of deploying assistance, it was sort of just assumed that if we give money to organizations, that somehow that's going to help artists. But as we know, like, artists were mostly out of work. We're only supported by the universal benefits that were offered to everyone else in society. And there was no real agency for artists to assert what it is that our value is in a society in a moment of all these overlapping crises. And so for me, I started to really ask myself this question more pointedly, like, why do we need artists? And I think that part of it for me is transcending this notion that artists are only valuable because of the products and experiences that we create, because that's what feeds the system of cultural production, right? Like the things, the inputs that we make that are then capitalized on and that are shared in marketplaces, right? Like that's the paradigm of the system of cultural production. But, you know, anyone who is a practicing artist knows that the processes of creation that we engage in also have a value to them that is not well understood and not well engaged as a knowledge system, as a way of imagining forms of organizing and designing systems. And so I think this is like this language around world making, the artist as world maker, is what I'm really interested in, and also interested in what exactly is art as a knowledge system? Like, what kind of knowledge are we engaging in when we're using artistic process? And how is that different from, say, the knowledge systems that are engaged with when we conduct science experiments, or the kind of knowledge systems that inform research inside academic institutions, or even in like the public school system, right? And it feels like we're in a world that is like slowly but surely oriented itself toward knowledge systems that are like out of balance, that we've lost the important knowledges that come out of acts of creation. And so the question I feel like would be interesting for us to talk about is that do those processes have any role in systems change, right? So not even thinking about like public policy specifically, but our conversations through the pandemic and beyond, and also before, but they've been really amplified to say like, yeah, the system is broken, right? Like we've all heard that. The system is broken. So what does that mean? Like when we use that language, it feels like it gets placed in a space that's like out of our grasp, right? Like how do I change the system? I can't change the system. But actually, like, we are the system. Like the system, we can't exist separately from it. So the way that we are and the way that we engage in the system is either reifying it, like strengthening it as it is, or it's creating disruption, or it's creating resistance, or it's modeling new things. And so this is one of the questions we're asking in the Public Imagination Network. Like, how can we create disruptions? How can we like elevate the value of art as a knowledge system to act as agents inside a system, right? Like we are inside the system that we don't like. So how can we act inside of that in a way that starts to model something different, that starts to resist the ways that we might feel harmed inside the system? Like the hustle of our world is really real. So what happens if we like stay off the highway? And this is the tension that we're always living in, because like as Leslie mentioned, there are consequences, right? Like we're not all independently wealthy, so we can't all like just get off the highway and make art and not participate in the act of having to resource ourselves to survive and pay our rent and feed ourselves and all that. So this is the trickiness of it, right? Like how can we create these resistances while still having to participate in support of our own survival, our own well-being? But so the question that I want to ask, just to like kick off the conversation, and I really hope that we can, break the mold and not be a panel and just be a circle conversation, because I really would love to hear what your experiences have been in this. But when you think about the system, however that sits in your mind, maybe it's a very abstract idea, but maybe there are some really concrete ways you feel impacted by the system. Can you think of ways or a way that the system is supportive to you? And conversely, is there a way that the system is really not? Like might be creating harm or might be really creating problems for you in the pursuit of your work and in the pursuit of your own thriving in this world? So I'd love to just would you?
I think I need a microphone.
Yeah, okay. I think it's because of recording.
I'm just going to start so I can get this off my chest. I'm going to start with an apology because I work in the arts, but I work with artists presenting their work to the public. I am more interested in community-engaged art rather than exhibitions of art, so that you're engaging with the audiences rather than just presenting something to them. But I'm going to apologize because I think I'm one of those people that wants to see that concrete product that artists are coming out with. And so I think whatever you've been trying to accomplish today has just been accomplished because I'm going to go away and change woman, I promise. But the reason this is because a lot of what we need to deliver something to grantors, to funders, to sponsors, to municipalities, to our employers. And I've been working with a lot of artists this year who are telling me about their process and how important their process is to their work, and I've been struggling, and I've been saying, oh, but what do we get? I can say this to them. What do we get out of that? And what's the final result of this? Like, what is the public going to see? What is the engagement going to be? Because I'm feeling like so much of it is going to be lost along the way, but now I'm starting to think of it in a new way. That's all I wanted to say.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Did you want to chime in before the mic gets too far away?
Yeah.
It's okay. You don't have to. I just want to make sure you had a chance if you wanted to say something.
I feel like you're nodding a lot. Can I give you the
Thank you, Leslie. I'm Abhimanyu. I just graduated from Winchester, and there is this double-edged sword that I wanted to talk about, which kind of liberates the artist. At the same time, there is a certain requirement that as artists we all need to present, which is, and we have been talking about equity and diversity all this while. So one of the things, especially in grants and scholarships and applications to funders, what we require is to parade kind of how much equity we need, like in the sense that we need to like show that we are so downtrodden, like I'm a brown artist, like immigrant, I really need this support, and therefore you fund my project, which is awesome, but like the project should be the one that should be speaking, not like I don't need your money because I'm this like it's I need it because I'm oppressed by the structure and I still have a good project. So I'm thinking like how to kind of balance this out in a way that we don't have to parade our miseries while also like kind of communicate that our projects are worth investing into. So this was, it's a double-edged sword, and I wanted to know all of your thoughts.
Like, we just had a whole conversation about this, but I feel this so hard. There's an OAC grant that's specifically for anybody who's not a white, able-bodied person.
Yeah.
And so what happens is, and even not like even the grant, like they have the question is very sneakily like, tell us your artistic vision. And also, if you want to tell us what BIPOC thing you are, this is the moment to tell us. So it's like wink, wink, by the way, 300 words.
Yeah.
But, and I've been on the jury that is for that program for people who are not white and able-bodied. That's right.
Mm.
Yeah, and so with the feeling on the other side, which you're like, yeah, thank you for this, because this is like, I think anybody who is not white and able-bodied, frankly, feels that this, whatever is the intention around the funding bodies doing like these programs, setting aside money, mostly feels like, we know you're not good enough, so like we know you're not going to get the same money as like white people. It feels like a backwards sort of like, yeah, like that. This is how downtrodden I am by this system. While I also, please also can I have this money? Just I want to make the work that I want to make, and I don't want to, you know, parade as you said, like all of these things about me. But also, I've also heard of programs not getting money because you didn't parade it. Mm-hmm. Had you paraded it, then they would have like, oh, had you told us that you were in these groups and we would have given you this money. That's totally happening. Mm-hmm. So, but your question is like what to do about it, ultimately, I think is kind of what this group is hoping to do. So we don't want to work under, like we're not applying to, I hope it's okay to share, we're not applying to funding to work inside with the funders. We want to work alongside them. And that's the thing, that's also the thing about being a group of artists, this sort of solidarity around a group of us that come from all these different disciplines who sort of have the same, like, ultimately, like, feeling about how it's not working in these ways. So I guess that's it, just that I definitely hear you and have felt it for a long time, and you're not the only person who's had that feeling about these kinds of programs or the way the funding bodies are approaching DEI in this very like unfortunate way. That's like backwards.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, and I'm agreeing because for me, I hear the many systems, right? There's funding as a system, there's community as a system, there's, you know, production, there's all these systems in which we're actually engaging with. And for me, I like to interrogate those systems, and that's my interest in the network. as well, because we're interrogating each other every time we meet and have conversations, but we're also interrogating the ways in which we're arriving within the systems that actually makes us, we're here. And I love that, because for me, I notice the disconnects in the systems. I work significantly in the system. Shannon and I first met, oh my God, years ago. She was responding to a paper that was a part of a system. That system no longer exists, right? And that's where we've been having conversations about this work ever since. And for me, the disconnections is like, when you hear, I used to work for the Living Arts Center, and they would say, oh, we need to figure out how to get back into community. And I was like, I'm sorry, is the theater hovering over some perceived space? Right, so there's a system that says, we produce art, and then we make it through outreach, words again, through engagement. It's all one thing. So how can we think about the interconnected systems in which we work? That might be public, social, cultural, of where I think the arts fall under, and how I think we can support artists to understand their work, their practice as change makers within those particular systems. Because I think that's the beauty of it. And we do it every day. But as Shannon is saying, we also document the ways in which we do it every day, because that's not part of how the system has taught us to value. So we're always validating our work sometimes in the wrong way. How much funding we get, how much, rather than the value that we're contributing to actual practice.
Making some eyes.
I'm trying to think where I want to come from with answering this question. I'm an emerging curator, which is very interesting, but recently also working for a public art organization, understanding systems from a different lens through public art. I'm also from Edmonton, and so I think a lot of my experience with the systems have been from my struggle to tackle the limited amount of spaces that exist for Black artists, Black-led spaces, Black-owned spaces that exist for us. And so curating in those spaces was a challenge for sure, and trying to kind of find opportunities for my peers and kind of just just navigating through that kind of lens. And so public art is really interesting in that it doesn't have the same bureaucracy with museums and galleries where you have to navigate certain marginalized communities that don't necessarily have the access to get formal education, which is something that can be of a barrier to accessing these gallery spaces. So there's just a plethora of challenges that exist, I think, within the systems, and this is something I've been thinking about pre-pandemic. So it's ongoing, and it's tough to,
How long have you been in Ontario for?
just a year actually in March. Yeah, I moved in March last year.
And are you feeling the difference between Edmonton and Toronto?
Oh yeah. In so many ways. Financially, diversity, there's lots of differences, but
And do you want to could you elaborate? Are you comfortable elaborating on that?
sure, in which aspect?
In I guess how you feel the system here.
Oh, okay. I do find that because it's a much more diverse and also a much larger city, of course, it's a lot more people, there have been a lot more opportunities for me to find Black-led spaces, Black-owned spaces, spaces that are BIPOC focused or led than there are in Alberta. There is a really small up and coming, very green arts and culture space in Edmonton specifically is where I'm from, so I'll just speak to that. But I have worked a little bit in Calgary in different spaces in Alberta, so I know a little bit. It's not very different across the province, but so I've noticed that sense.
back to the other thing about the needing to parade. And as an arts producer, I just feel like my hands are tied. Have we swung too far in the other direction with this BIPOC EDI thing? If I just keep thinking of all these grants and the questions we're asking, how we're trying to, who said sneakily asking, Leslie?
Yes.
We're also sort of like sneakily answering, and we actually like all start making a list of like what each artist is, and like this feels so gross.
Yep.
And so we're trying to like say it in a way that isn't a list for some reason. But I just don't know what to do. Like, if we can't get that money, like, this is the question for everyone else.
There's something I've been thinking about just around that question that I'd love to like put in the room, which is that, you know, in the moment of the amplification of the ways that the system is creating harm, there was acceleration of policy change that happened, right? But policy change is not the same thing as culture change. And I feel like that culture change requires the knowledge system that the arts have to offer, because art is culture making. It changes rituals and codes of conduct. It changes like relationships to people in space. Policies are like more like guardrails, things that we put in place as a set of rules that we're required to follow. But it doesn't necessarily, like, it's not mutually exclusive that policy and culture are the same thing. Like, you can have an organization that has a really excellent anti-harassment policy, and you can still have bullying inside the culture of that organization. It's 100% possible. We've probably all seen it, right? So I think this is what I'm talking about. Like, so when we think about cultural production, where within the system of cultural production are we attending to the culture making process, the ways that we are relating to each other? Because I feel like that is where the potential for collective thriving exists. And policy is more a way of placing guardrails so that there are consequences if certain rules are egregiously broken. But like, it feels like policy says that we're not allowed to be mean to each other, and culture says we should be nice to each other. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's very reductive, very, very reductive. But do you know what I mean? It's not the same thing. And so, but there is a kind of interrelationship, and I feel like in the moment of social justice activism, there's been an intensification of policy action that is like an experiment. It's an experiment because there is no right or wrong way like that is true all the time of how to be in right relationship with people who are different from you. But we're not really in this process of culture making around how to be in right relationship among our differences. And there's very strong power dynamics at play in how those policies take shape. And I feel like we're kind of getting it wrong because we're not attending enough to culture, and we're focusing too much on policy so that we can measure and check the boxes as funders and governments do, so that we can like say, okay, we did it. And it's clear because here it is, here's the policy, here's the action, and we've done it, right?
Yeah, this is such great. Again, just so grateful to be part of this discourse. I guess the first thing I want to say that when it comes to like policies and decision-making bodies, I feel like the first question we should ask is which voices are we excluding? What are the bodies that are not being able to be part of this? Like, as someone who does not have a permanent status in Canada, I'm often, almost all the time, I cannot apply to grants even though I'm eligible for it in other aspects, right? Even though I have work, but I'm not, just because I don't have that piece of paper that makes me a citizenship in this country, right? So I think for me that is like very important, that I do want like institutions and organizations to know that it is really, that question should be at the forefront. Because oftentimes when this call outs are being made, there's always someone who's going to be excluded. And yeah, I guess the other thought that I have that sometimes I feel like having too much policies and too many frameworks oftentimes kind of slows down our approaches to decolonization. And I feel like that really hinders that process. So, because I don't think I've ever seen anything that where decolonization and having a lot of policies ever go hand in hand. So I'd really like to see your thought on that. Just, and yeah, and I get, as someone who's a recent graduate from Old Cadre University, oftentimes I hear like my BIPOC peers say that whenever we apply to somewhere, it seems like we also like going on about your talk about, creating, like the only works that tend to get accepted are the ones where we talk about our culture and our identity. And I was like, well, that is an emotional labor because sometimes you do not want to talk about your experience. It's traumatizing. And I feel like just, bringing that up again re-traumatizes you, whether it's like in artistic spaces or whenever you're performing, like where is the aftercare, like how can we center wellness and make sure we also take care of our artists at, during this whole process as well. So those are the things that are like coming up for me while we're also having this discussion. And yeah, I'd like to hear people's thoughts on this. Yeah. Shall I
So just to sort of add to what you said, I'm still struggling with what it is that I identify with in terms of, because I've spent 15 years not in this country and I've spent 15 years in this country, so which is literally half of my life, and I don't know if I'm fully Indian or if I'm fully Canadian. So I'm just like you said, I'm tapping into doors that sort of want to support me, but am I being genuine about it, right? Also, there have been times where I sort of not feel, first of all, very intelligent sitting amongst all of you because I am not an academically trained artist. I've just started as volunteering, and here I am 5 to 7 years in this space. So, sorry if something I say is
don't apologize. Really good point though about like who is an artist and like what does that process mean? Who values that? And like what are the markers of success or being an artist?
And that is probably part of the system as well.
Mm-hmm.
That suggests that. I don't have a dance degree.
Yeah.
I've been dancing since I was 10, right? I've survived, but without having a dance degree. So I think it's also this idea of like, why is it necessary to have that particular degree?
Yeah.
As a world maker, as a creative, as persons existing in this space, what's most important, right? Is it the work that you're going to do and the communities you're going to support and help? Or is it the fact that you have to go through formalized education that now deems you an artist because you have that degree? So I think those are also part of the systems, education systems, creative systems, and it's really interesting also because I think that path to decolonization is also then understanding there's diversities within, the ways in which policy should enact based on the person's need. Mm-hmm. I am Jamaican by birth. What I do not present is my family's Asian ethnicity. So I'll always be read as a Black person. So when I walk into a room and they say, it must have been hard for you, and I go, hard to do what? I said, what I'm tired of doing is being the only Black man or Black person in the room speaking with politicians like you and I have, or with persons around where change can happen. So the idea again of change making, disrupting spaces for change making to happen is, I'll just drop the bomb in there and chaos will happen, and I go, okay, yeah, great. Right? Because it's also not I don't think it's my duty or our duty to actually then make suggestions, because then those suggestions becomes the policies that we end up having, be really oppressive things. And I've experienced them. Even at the toppest of places, I've experienced those oppressive things on my being, on a person as an artist, as someone who works in the work that I do. That's also some of my interest with the network, is how do we begin to usurp those particular assumptions that words make, artistic excellence, like what is involved in that? Or, what is involved in those complicated things? Viability, like what does that mean? Like impact, what is,
But it's also why it's like super important to make space for you to speak in plain language, and whatever language you're bringing to this conversation is valuable and welcome, and your experience in your own words is valuable.
And it was quite interesting because my academic background is very scientific. So I understand why systems need to exist because I've had that sort of training. And then when I started off volunteering in the arts community, I was like, art shouldn't have system, right? Isn't that what differentiates art from everything else? Only to sort of a few years later be like, no, you still have to navigate through systems, sort of at least to get to a position of where you can then break the system. So that's what I'm figuring out right now in my journey.
And it's really impactful because here you are, someone who does not have status to apply for funding, but is paying taxes every single time they buy something, which is the same money that is then used to support the system. This is where the funding comes from, right? So I think it's also interesting, and I think these are the sort of the things that is really interesting to me to say, well, how do persons who do not have permanent residency or Canadians actually get into a thing that they're contributing to? So how do you begin to dismantle that? Because you are, right? Systems just need to, they're not talking to each other, systems. I would suggest.
I mean, something I'd love to just remark on in what you said also is that, just wanted to remark on it is, in your own mind, does academic and artist hold a different status of intelligence? Is that something that the system is expressing that doesn't feel true, actually?
Personally, when I started off, I didn't think so. I thought academics was only there sort of to get you a job, the exact job. Not in terms of if you are capable of performing whatever that you're performing. I did start off volunteering because I did think that I just can't jump on stage, obviously, and that sort of a little bit of training. But I don't think there is a difference between being an academic versus learning it on your own. And I just don't know if that's, at least that's what I thought, but I don't know if people were perceiving me as that. I don't know if the people that I was going to offering my services thought that I was capable enough because I did have academic. I think that perception slowly changed over years, and it's okay, I guess, because I guess they've had their own sort of reasons for believing that academic brings a certain level of discipline or processes that you probably don't have if you're coming in with zero knowledge. But I didn't think so. I had the confidence of going and be like, I will learn on the go. I can do that. I've learned a lot of things out of this as well. But personally, I didn't. But I think I've realized that slowly that people perceive me did.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I'm, kind of trying to unearth is to look at systemically, academics have positions in society, they have salaries attached to it. They do have processes and methods of inquiry. Well, so do artists. Artists have processes and methods of inquiry. We research and we generate knowledge, but we do not have high status, and we do not have high salaries typically attached to that. And so there's systemically a different perception. And so I think it's worth noticing whether or not we are embodying that perception as well, or whether we can create disruptions in the system by thinking of ourselves of a similar status and value as an academic, because we work in a knowledge system, because we conduct research, because we are expressing something about our world in its own way. And so that is an action that we can sort of dismantle in ourselves to start creating change in how the system expresses value for an academic versus an artist.
So just I till date sometimes when I ask, well, what is that I can do next or differently? Why don't you go back to school and study art? So I still get that. So.
Did
you have something? Yeah.
I think part of the issue with systems in general is usually they're not set up for anyone who's divergent from the norm. The norm being cishet, white, male, as we all know. And if anyone wants to be anybody, I am queer, trans, and settler indigenous. I will take that. Or a job. I will take it. I think the issue also with formal academia is being in it right now. I'm in my final year of university. And I don't think it actually, yeah, you learn things, but I think informal knowledge sharing is way more valuable. And storytelling is way more valuable. I think it's a better way to learn. I think formal academia gets us jobs, I guess, but I think the problem with the system is it's not set up for success. But yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch on that too, because I do also really see the value in storytelling. I also have formal education, but not in arts. And so I also think I come from it from like in my experience, a lot of POCs, a lot of immigrant communities from familial pressure usually feel like they have to get like PhDs before they can pursue what they really want to pursue. And so I do see that pattern as well. And I do think, like, to your point, like, do we affirm this within the systems? Like, these colonial structures exist, but do we kind of support it in our own lived experiences because we kind of abide to the pressures in a sense? I've been trying to work on curating projects from Rwanda, and so like trying to do research. A lot of art history is oral history, which is a lot different in the way that I've learned on how to research history and how to navigate, how to kind of conduct that, because I can't just go into a library and like have a database of information that I can just collect, but at the same time, it is very rich history and it's really important work, and I want it to exist and I want it to get further into our future, and if we don't do this work, then it won't. So kind of, yeah, I think there's an importance to kind of, yeah, disrupting what we know and not necessarily always kind of just going with what is the norm or what has been accustomed to us, which is difficult. I understand the struggles of like not having residency and like all of these different challenges as well. And like I always kind of tackle like what my identity is as well, as coming from Rwanda as a first generation, but then also having moved to the Netherlands, living there for 10 years, and then coming here, English being like my third, almost fourth language, like all of these different intersections of our identity that are not always necessarily at the forefront of how we think of ourselves, but then applications for schools or for grants, all of a sudden having to like parade that and having to kind of, oh, okay, I guess I do check off all these boxes, but I don't really think of myself as that person per se, and how to figure out how to kind of disrupt without also, yeah, exhausting yourself in the process as a person and taking on all of that work alone to kind of, you know, challenge these systems, but you still want to put the work in to kind of create a different future. So.
You had your hand up for a little bit and then maybe circle back. Yeah.
Yes. I wanted to echo what you said in the sense that like how to balance literary or artistic ambition with activism, in the sense that like personally I want to be a famous playwright, also possibly a rich one, and if somebody as big as I don't know Marvish, or if they commission me and if they want me to write a play about all white people, then possibly I'll take it, because if they are offering me so much money, it's super hard for me as somebody who is struggling to say no. So I'm just like thinking like how do you navigate what we truly believe in with our actual life condition. And also, like, just because we care about all these causes, does it also mean that because the system does not exist for that work to be done, like, do we let go of our personal ambitions?
Good questions. Yeah, good questions. I just wanted to extend the invite for anybody who wants to join the circle. If you feel like it, this is not a formal panel, so you're fine to sit there if you want to, but if you'd like to join up here, there's lots of seats. We have time. We have 5 minutes.
Something I've been trying to work through personally is trying to figure out how labeling my identity really positions me in the world. And also something I've come to realize is like I can claim these identities and get money and kind of participate in the system in a way that benefits me. But also I've come to realize that these identities also allow me to foster connection between other people like me. And so I've just found that reframing, kind of working within the system, because we don't, as of right now, like the present, we don't really have a choice until we change it. But it's just been something I've been thinking about.
I have a little like thought experiment to try and share. It's riffing on a few different thoughts shared here. So something I've given a lot of thought to because I'm inside the academy right now, and it's like new to come back to school after a long time and be confronted with all of this new ways of thinking and being required to do things. And so I was sort of riffing on, like, Shannon was talking about the difference between policy and culture and how those two things like coexist and might be different or share some spaces. And then there was a question around decolonizing as well, riffing on that same thing, and brought together a few thoughts. Like one, so based on an important article that was written by an Indigenous author about 10 years ago called "Decolonization is Not a Metaphor." I spent a lot of time like wrestling with this article as a storyteller. The point that is being made in this article is a very important one, which is that decolonization started to get thrown around as a word in social justice spaces as a kind of stand-in for anything social justice becomes decolonial or decolonization. And the point that was being really well articulated in this article, of course, is that it cannot be separated from land repatriation. That land back is an essential piece of what the meaning of decolonization is from an Indigenous perspective. And it's led me onto a very deep dive into like the changing and shifting meanings of decolonization, which like means different things from different global vantage points and in different eras. So there's like that layer, but then there's also a layer as an artist of like, but if metaphor is the territory that I work in, like, what about that? And like, I think that there's something potent about this as a metaphor. Like, I get your point and I agree, but also, if we can't change the story, if we can't like imbue the language, like then what are we doing? So like, how that's a paradox. And then I was thinking about this question. So then I was thinking about metaphor and like, can we extend the metaphor of like the difference between policy and culture to, in the academy, the kind of difference between like traditional academic standards, shall we say, and the way that feminism interrupted the academy in the early days of saying like, no, we need to talk about lived experience as being a valid like entry point into these conversations. We can't just talk about up here, we have to talk about the body, we have to talk about people's lived experience. And so thinking about those are like, and then just thinking about the embeddedness of patriarchy inside of our systems also, and in that schism between like talking and thinking, and even, you know, we started the day with Charles's great like way of framing the land acknowledgement as not performance, and this idea of like performing these words and these ideas, and then embodied experience and the lived experience. And then as storytellers in the arts, how do we integrate those things and allow them to like live in metaphor and give metaphor? Like how can metaphor have legs and impact and part of the system change that we're talking about? I don't know, it's a thought in process, but I just wanted to put those things in the ring. I think we're like close to the end of the session. Are there any concluding thoughts or thoughts that haven't been offered?
I mean, I could offer maybe a closing thought if anyone else has anything that's coming to mind right now. Something that's very potent for me in thinking about the work of the Public Imagination Network and also this question about systems change is like how much is the system active inside of me, and to what extent can I transgress, right? Like when can I not transgress because I need something too much and I can't sacrifice that in order to create change in that moment, like to your point. But you know, our lives are not fixed in that way, like especially in a system like the arts, it's quite volatile, right? Like we do have good moments sometimes, we have lots of crappy ones. But like there are moments where suddenly we find ourselves in a position of being resourced for a minute and for like making decisions that impact other people for a minute, like a project that we might be leading, or a panel that we might be sitting on, or a committee that we might be asked to participate in. And in those moments, how can I transgress generatively to move the system to just, even if it's just to point the gaze toward collective thriving and to not double down on the hierarchy of individualism and like, you know, ordering things in a way where some people win and some people lose. And so I think about that all the time now, because there are definitely moments where I feel I can't because I have too much at stake personally and it's too hard in that moment. But there are also moments where I feel like I really can. And even if it's just a small choice to like turn a panel into a circle, if it's that small, it's something, it's like just constantly allowing that the possibility of transgressing the system to start modeling something different to the extent that we can.
So thank you for participating in our system. But I have to say thank you for your thoughts and opinions. We also, as part of the PIN network, or the PIN network as part of the PIN, we didn't want to come with any assumed knowledge, right? So we wanted to have a conversation to begin to unpack some of the same things we're grappling with, and not have it also be insular, like, oh, we are now coming up with this great new idea. But it's like, what ideas exist that we need to hold and understand differently? And the implication of how we arrive into these systems and structures is something that I have to, and do think about every single day, you know, because I think also titles have this assumption that, you know, I'm an artistic director one day, I'm a program manager one day, and I walk into spaces and I'm just like, I don't know. I just want to be. I didn't wake up this morning. Leave me alone. You know, and is that okay? Like, how do we begin to exist within the systems in our fullest selves? We're able to contribute to this sort of ways in which we can shift the shape-shifting of the systems. And I think that's also part of the change making and world making that we're curious about. So I want to say thank you so much. Thank you, yes. Thanks to MassCulture, who supported part of this particular process that we're going through. And we have more to come, including a website and some other, you know, formality things in IT systems. I'm gonna start doing it all the time. But yeah, I think we have some curiosities of doing some work around also where our thoughts intersect as one big thing.